Good evening, Carlos.
Good evening, Sylvie. How you doing?
I'm fine. And you, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
First of all, I would like to ask you, since you mentioned that you had the opportunity to have deep conversations with the plant spirits, have you ever discussed with them this unfortunate situation with the destruction of the nature on our planet and the Amazon jungle, which from their perspective would be straightforward murder uh, of their bodies in this dimension. What would be their take on this?
Well, I think it's important to remember that they have existed. First of all, I've never actually spoken specifically about it, but I can give you like my opinion as I see it. Kind of like you giving your idea that they might perceive it as murder. I don't think that they would, but they plants in general are so much older than us, have been on the planet for so many more millions and just hundreds of millions of years more than us, in some form. And I really don't think that they are too concerned about it, to be honest. We are very immature in our consciousness as human beings. We are really like toddlers or infants. And I guess I could say how the has 5 trillion cells roughly that compose the body and make it all up. And each of those cells is an individual. And some of those cells do damage to the body, but if you were to ask the body, they wouldn't like be angry. I'm not angry at any of my cells, and it's all part of a process. And the planet itself is like a cell in the body of the universe, and it's so much bigger. It's so much bigger than anything. The last 100,000 years is the blink of an eye. It's less than a blink of an eye. And the planets aren't going anywhere. If anything, we might pass. But I don't think that the plants are worried about it, and I don't think that the plants are, feel any negative feelings towards human beings for doing what they're doing.
Since sometimes you can see inside the bodies of the people that you're treating, have you ever seen any chakras in their bodies?
I've seen my own chakras. I don't, again, like, don't have a very big background in that. So if I was to like look into someone else, I wouldn't be looking for their chakras. I think that someone that had studied that and would have a background in it would most likely be more focused on that. Usually I'm trying to look at the state of people's organs, their circulation, and blood toxicity, things like that, that might allow me to understand or devise a method for treatment of the physical body of a particular illness or condition. But within myself, I think, I've looked at myself the most, and I have definitely seen what I perceive to be my chakras, and I guess I saw them in a way that was similar to how they're typically described, with the colors associated through the visible spectrum and lining up in the way that they do. But I didn't really investigate them, probably because I don't have a strong understanding of them. So I did observe them and noticed that I could actually quite easily increase their volume, like increase their strength or their power, make them shine brighter and full without much trouble in that space. And so I did that, but again, because I haven't done much study of that, it wasn't something that I focused on, nor did I go back to try to work on more. But I did have those experiences. I have had a couple of those experiences in my own just observations in looking at myself. I don't even think I really saw them inside my body, because my body didn't really exist if I'm recalling that memory, like my body didn't really exist at that time, or at least I was maybe so deep into my body that I couldn't see it anymore, like it was too expansive for me to see the boundaries of it. But as I recall, because I noticed that they did match up with the colors of the spectrum, that would be 7. And I didn't investigate them individually, but I did touch them, I guess with my mind, I guess you could say. And simply by doing that, they expanded significantly and seemed to like become healthy and whole. Just like that was my perception, I guess, at the time, but I don't really know.
Now, in the previous interview, you mentioned that a small group of humanity will make it to the next beautiful new earth that is coming soon, something like that. So my question is, when is that happening? Can you tell us some time frame?
Well, first, let me just make sure that I clarify what I was saying. So it was a description of, I believe, a talk that I had with some extraterrestrial beings. And at the time, they were showing me a city that was being constructed on Ganymede, the moon of Jupiter. And when I was asking them about that, this is during an ayahuasca vision, they told me that the city was being built for some of the humans or the people on this planet that would transcend the current dimension of reality, the physical plane, you could call it, and exist at a higher vibrational frequency, similar to the way that water turns to vapor simply by an increase in its vibrational frequency. It exists in a different state, and that happens to be a state that is invisible. And so they basically explained, or this one particular being explained to me, that some human beings would transcend, vaporize, you could say, and that they would become invisible to their former plane of existence, or the beings that were still in that plane of existence, and they could choose to stay on Earth, but they would not be seen, and it would be, they would be able to affect the change that they could if they wanted to, or they could come and live with these beings from the moon of Jupiter who existed at that plane, and so it would be visible to them, and so they could come and live there instead if they chose to. And I did say when that would happen, but they didn't give me like a particular date. They just said soon.
But any of your teachers, they never had visions about these things?
I had one teacher, my first teacher, who told me that a comet or a meteor was going to strike the Earth. And he actually did give a date of 2018, but he also said that that was based on his calculations, and that wasn't like a date specifically given to him by the extraterrestrials, but that there would be a tremendous change in the planet caused by that meteor or that comet. I guess it would be a meteor, and but he didn't really talk about a transcending experience, but that the world itself would be like transformed by that.
Have you ever ventured in the realms inhabited of souls who are in between earthly lives, so to say, the places where we have heard they are choosing the destiny of their next life or other similar activities? Have you ever been there?
I don't know if it's like a there, but I have communicated with spirits that were not, that had passed on, and people that I had known when I was alive, when they were alive, rather, and they did explain to me a little bit about that process, although it wasn't necessarily about what would happen next, but what had happened before, and that they had chosen to be in the lives that they did, that they had for a particular reason, because it would enable them to make progress as a soul or a spirit, and that there were things that they needed to work on, and so they chose life that would provide them an opportunity to work on those, or to develop or improve certain aspects of them. And so they chose lives that would provide those opportunities, and oftentimes the way that they died was part of that. And mostly that came from my mother, who passed in 2009, and so she wanted to make sure that I understood, because she could tell that I felt guilty about her death, because I had brought plant medicines back in the hopes of treating her, but she was a nurse for 40 years and chose Western medicine instead. And I felt like I didn't do a good enough job to convince her to try a different form of medicine. And so when I saw her after her passing in a ceremony, I feel like, wanted to make sure that I knew that she chose to die, and specifically to die in a way that would have suffering involved, and explain the aspect of her personality or her character that she wanted to improve, and how the opportunities in her life allowed her the chance to make those improvements. And I thought that was really interesting. And I have another friend of mine, a very close friend when I was growing up, who committed suicide. And after just a few months after he committed suicide, I saw him in a ceremony also. And he didn't talk to me about why he had chosen that life, or even why he had committed suicide. But he did provide insight into the nature of the afterlife, if you want to call it that, or how you are when you pass away. And those two interactions specifically helped to shape my view on the concepts of heaven and hell, and what does happen when you die. And for me, the journey continues, the processes continue, and however you are when you die is how you continue to be. And so obviously you would hope to die in a good way, like with joy in your heart and compassion for beings, and free from hatred or negative emotions. But whatever it happens to be your state, then that's how you are afterward, except that you exist in a dimension that has no time and can only make changes when you return to a dimension that does have time. So if you're still looking to make improvements and still looking to develop, then you want to come back into another body and another physical plane and allow yourself the opportunities to make those important changes so that you can continue to develop your spirit.
Now let's talk a little bit about possession by spirits. Spirits possessing humans, something like that, which is again very vague, but don't you think that possession itself is kind of encroaching on the sovereignty of soul, on our freedom that we have been promised by God, being his particles or something like that? At least we think at least we see the things in this way.
I'm sorry, did you say God promised us something?
No, at least, yeah, I said that it wasn't a good, a good formulation. Well, at least people tend to think that way. Many people.
Well, I definitely don't think that God made us any promises. Considering that we are God, we can make those promises to ourselves, but I don't think that God is outside of us, and I don't think God is outside of anything, nor would it be outside of a spirit that possesses another body. So I don't think it really has anything to do with that notion, at least the way that I look at it. I don't think that that God makes rules that are imposed upon beings outside of God. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But I do. I again, like we're entering into the realm of interpretation, and there's a lot of options whenever you enter those realms. And when you have experiences, then you just do your best to try to figure out what is happening or what did happen if you look back on it. And I certainly have had experiences that I interpreted as possessions, not myself, but witnessing them in others. And what really was happening, I don't know if you could ever say that at any time, but I can say that I chose to interpret it that way because I didn't have a better way of interpreting it. I'm open to those ideas, and certainly I could try to put together a different way of interpreting it as an alteration of a person's own spirit or an alteration of their own consciousness, but it really did look that way, and I think there's a reason why it has been described and remains as part of our understanding of reality today, that something is happening and seem to have the best attempt to understand it by using the concepts of possession. But what is really happening there, I don't know. Like, I do have some of my own ideas about how possession can take place, where a lack of self-love would create an opening and kind of like bring your guard down where you don't care because you don't love, you don't care. And so another spirit that may have intentions of possession could be like welcomed or even invited into a being because of that lack of self-love, which could have been caused by severe trauma or something of that nature. And I have those ideas based on my own experiences and talking and seeing people that have had situations that I would describe as possessions. But it's, I certainly am not going to claim that I have figured it out or something. I don't know if anybody really has. But what has, interestingly enough, been figured out, and not just in indigenous cultures, but cultures across the world, is how to deal with it. And, I think, thank thanks to some Hollywood movies, more and more people are aware that there is a recognition of spiritual possession, and exorcisms are part of religious practices around the world, and the indigenous culture wouldn't be that different. They might not call it an exorcism, but the concept is still very similar to what we would see if we watched the movie The Exorcist or several of the other films that have come out that have, I think, raised an awareness of the public as to the number of times it happens, and how common it is, and even that the Catholic Church has their own specific schooling and training for exorcisms. So, of course, maybe it's just a naive understanding of something that's much deeper and that we'll figure out better, but it is interesting and adds to it kind of confirms our concepts for interpretation when they're cross-cultural and when they're, repeating over and over a long period of time and across long spans of distances. And so that's what we're seeing with that concept. And, again, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it is, but if you can work within a model and using that model achieve your goals, then that's a successful model. And if you can relieve a person's suffering by interpreting their situation by a possession and using the concepts and methodologies of exorcism to relieve that suffering, then in the end, you relieve the suffering of a person that was suffering. You healed them. So whatever model of interpretation took place to do that was a successful model, the same way that science chooses which theories to believe in and which models to use to describe the world based on the ability to accurately affect change, So in that sense, as long as we're able to remove spirits, then we'll most likely continue to believe in possessions because it provides a model with which we can alleviate suffering.
About implants, and I'm talking about purely three-dimensional implants, nothing astral. There are quite a few stories circulating that surgeons and even common people have been extracting them from their bodies. Have you seen anything like this? Because you see it sometimes through people's bodies.
I've had some people claim that they did have implants, but I've never seen one extracted myself, not a physical implant that you're talking about. I really don't know much about it. I thought what you were going to ask about was kind of the plant implants, like plant spirits sometimes have implants that they give. And I don't think that they are three-dimensional, although I'm not totally sure, or at least physical. But that is part of the tradition here, and that's kind of an interesting relation, especially how I was talking about models and interpretation systems and how there is a greater level of confirmation when you see them across cultures or across spans and distances. And in this particular case, it would be plant spirits, but there is within the Shipibo tradition the idea and concept and model that plant spirits will implant chips, I guess you could call them, like little things that are probably similar to what the people that say that they have been implanted by extraterrestrials or some other spiritual being. And however, the difference is, at least I don't really know much about the implants I think that you were referring to, but it seems like people kind of tend to feel that they are negative or were done, with some sort of bad intentions or something. Whereas with the plant spirits, you feel blessed to have an implant from a plant spirit. It's like planting a seed inside of you that will grow, and with each branch of a new plant growing inside you comes deeper wisdom and better understanding and self-realization. So that would be a striking contrast between the two, and I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps we're just the people that believe in the implants from extraterrestrials maybe don't know enough, or perhaps it is a wonderful thing. Who knows? But it's interesting to see that the implants that I am familiar with that are given as gifts to people who have earned them, you could say, through dedication and devotion to the tradition itself, feel wonderfully blessed to receive them.
About the more powerful Icarus that are emerging lately, you mentioned them in the previous interview. So I am now a bit confused. On one side, you said that the power of the Icarus comes only from the intention behind. So then how is it possible that the new Icarus will be more powerful? Is it the case that you have like new intentions in mind, new ideas, or can you enlighten me in this regard?
Yeah, intention is an art form in its own right. I think that there are a lot of spiritual practices that are basically attempts to develop a higher level of art form, a higher level of skill within intention. You hear about manifesting and how to manifest, and there's kind of branches within the New Age movement that are specific to that. And there's intention is not simply just wanting something, and so what an Ikaro does is it takes an intention, it focuses an intention, and it enhances an intention. And so using a particular Ikaro, the intention, of course, is still the driving force. It's still the seed of the heart of the action. But the Ikaro itself is like the soil that nourishes that seed and that provides it the focus and the energy to accomplish its goals, to move forward and expand, and to it gives it its strength, it gives it its power, and it's what enables the art of intention to be fulfilled, and that's why they sing Ikaros, or otherwise they would just use their intentions on their own. But so a good Ikaro is a tool to take a person's intention and enhance it, develop it, and improve it, increase it, expand it, and fulfill the intention more by using the Ikaro.
Even experienced shamans sometimes get crossed. That's how you called it. I think you're referring to black magic, correct?
No, but crossed really just refers to there's a concept that you have lines of energy coming out of the spine, up from your spine and out of the top of your head, and these lines or cords of energy go and they connect to a lot of different places, a lot of different sources. They can connect to your ancestors, connect to plant spirits, connect to traumas, connect to various energy sources, both good and bad. And crossing literally is when those lines, and this is the perception, when those lines get crossed, and they are like energy cords or electrical cables, and so if you cross them, you can have a short circuit, kind of. Like the energy goes from positive to negative or gets messed up. There's shorts coming in and out. The flow isn't the same. It's like an electrical problem that we're familiar with when cables get crossed sometimes, or if you short out your plug or whatever. And so that's really what it refers to, the term crossed. And it can come from black magic, but that's not, it's not a reference to black magic. It's just a reference to the nature of your energy cords or your lines of energy.
Yeah, that's what people in India call Kundalini, actually. So, for whatever reason, they get crossed or something else gets crossed. My next question is about black magic. Now, I don't know if you and your teachers still can get touched by anything, but when I was in Pucallpa, all the shamans sometimes would get in trouble. I also know of many cases of even shamans who abandoned being shamans because of these problems, although they were like hereditary and well trained. And on the other hand, I was talking with Sebastian, Europe-born shaman, who is, by the way, traveling and performing ceremonies since a decade or something, all alone, handling big groups. And during the interview, we touched the subject of black magic, and what he told me was, if one believes that one cannot get touched by such things, they will never touch you. And he said, I am always protected, I cannot be harmed. That's what he said. And then what I hear, for example, what I heard from the Shipibos that I have been in touch with, I'm not saying all Shipibos are like that. They were trying to do the same thing, the same philosophy, but they didn't have the success that Sebastian has. So what is happening? Why it is working for him and apparently doesn't work for them?
Well, to be honest, it's pretty complicated, obviously. I think that a big part of it would be, black magic. It's not like there's just a bunch of people doing black magic to every single person in the world. It's something that is not so foreign. Basically, you need to have a person that doesn't like you and that wants to do harm to you. If you are living in the Amazon rainforest in an indigenous tribe that for thousands of years relied on black magic as a central part of its warfare and a central part of its mechanism to maintain, I guess you could say, order in the forest, preventing tribes from taking resources from you, or the same way that we have physical elements that do that within our countries and things like that, military systems and things like that. If that's your culture, then like in the U.S., where we're the culture of war, where the country is famous for being at war, we're never not at war, and coincidentally, we also have this really high murder rate, and there's tremendous violence, and there's shootings all the time, and that's like our culture. We're a warrior culture. When we sing the national anthem, our national anthem is about war. It's about blowing up people and killing them and fighting them and winning. And so if you're in the Amazon rainforest and you're in an indigenous tribe, then it's something that your ancestors did forever, going back. It was something that always was a part of it. So if someone bothered you, and everyone would just have those techniques, and they still linger. They're not the same, but they're still around, most especially in the indigenous tribes. So if you're bothered by a particular person, which could be as simple as having them be more successful than you, then you could do something against them to hurt them. And so I definitely would say that in general, the Amazon would be the place where the most brujeria or black magic is taking place, because that's where the culture of black magic was so far well developed. So if you're someone who's traveling around in Europe, even if you're working with ayahuasca, the chances that you're going to cross someone, and I mean that in a kind of traditional sense, that you're going to make an enemy, are probably pretty small, compared to someone who is living in a community next to another community and has a chance to make, all their mistakes in their lives. They bother the wrong person that they've known for 25 years, who knows everything about them and knows all their family members and all of that information. That just makes it much, much easier to get in trouble. Whereas someone who is not in that tradition, has no ancestry in that tradition, learned it only in this lifetime, and travels around in countries where it doesn't exist, then obviously you're going to have it be much, much safer. While I love the concept of, if you don't believe in something, then it doesn't exist, I think that speaks more towards your interpretation, the models of interpretation, and not necessarily the experience. So, if you don't think that cancer exists, then you will, if you have symptoms that someone else might diagnose as cancer, you might diagnose it differently. And does that mean that cancer doesn't exist because you don't believe in it? Not quite. It's you get to define how you interpret your experiences, and thus, by doing so, define how you describe your reality. And if you don't want to describe your reality by using black magic, then you'll have to find a different way to describe experiences that might be considered that by other people, if that makes sense. So there's, it's a complicated topic in that perhaps this gentleman is experiencing brujeria, or at least what would be called brujeria by someone in the Amazon, but he chooses not to call it that because he doesn't want to call it that. And maybe that's a better model. Maybe that model allows him to alleviate that suffering more easily or more quickly. But also maybe he is not even having those experiences because of a lot of the other aspects that are involved within black magic that I mentioned before. So I can't really say what's happening, and if he's successful because he doesn't believe in it or something of that nature. I don't think that if you are aware of something, then you believe in it to a certain extent. If you know what cancer is, but you choose not to believe in it, you still know what it is. So in a way, you still have awareness of it, and thus the awareness is tied to the belief in it. You can't just say that you don't believe in something if you can actually describe what you don't believe in. So it's a complicated matter for sure. I wish it was just as simple as, I don't want to believe in something, so therefore it won't exist. That would maybe we can achieve that. Maybe we can one day achieve that, or maybe some people can achieve that if they're swimming in the ocean and a shark is coming to eat them and they just think, I don't want to believe in sharks, and then the shark disappears. That would be awesome. It would be really helpful. But I'm not sure. I know I haven't achieved that yet. And that, I guess that would be my view about black magic, as well as every other thing that exists. And once it's been put into the sphere of consciousness, then to me it does exist. And we do have the choice of believing in it or not, but I look at that more in terms of how we choose to interpret experiences rather than the actual existence of the idea.